wonderful electronic invention I want you to see. It looks something like this.
The Veracity Podcast.
Discovery Sessions.
Greetings and welcome to this week's episode of the Veracity Podcast. This is a very, very special episode with a Victoria-based ACT police officer named Todd Mason. Todd Mason has been part of the ACT team for 3 years and has pretty much seen it all downtown. Todd shared a lot of great insight and identified some key issues with today's current justice system. Some of the topics we discuss are the mechanics in the ACT team here in Victoria, the current drug problem, especially focused on methamphetamine, and what it means to be a progressive police officer today. All right, enjoy the show. Well, Todd, thanks for being our second victim here.
You're welcome.
On the Veracity Podcast.
Mm-hmm.
You're a police officer. And I feel like that type of work requires a certain person. You have to be cut from a certain thread. So if you don't mind, tell me about your journey to becoming a police officer.
Okay. It was actually a long journey. It's interesting that you say it's cut from a certain cloth, because if you talk to my wife says that I'm a born first responder. That's what she says, right? I'm one of those guys who I've always found in my life I've been first to run into an emergency situation, or I'm running towards it while a lot of people are running away. When I was 14, I was actually, one of my first jobs, I was working at a restaurant as a busser and bussing tables, and I look out a window and a car got rear-ended by another car, and the car that got hit exploded and caught in the flame. First thing I did as a 14-year-old kid is I ran out the door and started pulling people out of the car. So I guess it's just sort of ingrained into me to do those sort of things, which I don't know if that's stupidity or what you would call it, but
I'd call it courage.
Yeah, well, thanks. Through high school, my uncle actually was a 35-year RCMP member, and I always looked up to him, and I always thought about getting into policing. And then in 1992, when I graduated from high school, I thought about getting into the RCMP, but didn't go. They wouldn't actually take me on because I was a white kid who didn't speak French fluently, so they wouldn't really take me. So I went on to university, got a psych degree, worked mental health with children for about 6 years.
Oh wow!
And then my life went completely to the other side, and I went to Vancouver and went to film school for a year and actually learned to do sound effects recording as a sound engineer, worked in movies and video games, stuff like that. So I did that for 6 or 8 years.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was kind of fun, but I felt like things were kind of lacking. I like being around people. I didn't like being in a room all day, just sitting in front of a computer by myself for 12 hours a day. So I happened to just work on do sound for a film through Vancouver Police, because they have the Odd Squad over there, and they do some really great films on the downtown east side. And they wanted what's called authentic downtown east side sound effects for this documentary they were doing. So I said I'd be happy to do that. And I said, but I'm not going to go wander around the downtown east side with $10,000 worth of recording gear on me at night. So they said, oh, well, just come, we'll give you a ride along. So I did 2 12-hour ride-alongs with the Vancouver Police, the beat team down in the downtown east side, and just chatting with them and how much they loved the job and what the great work they're doing in the downtown east side. I went home that night to my wife and I said, I'm thinking I want to do another career change. And of course she slapped her head and almost started crying, but she was super supportive. And she said, well, if you want to go into policing, let's move back to the island. So I applied at Saanich, Victoria, and got in. That's 10 years ago now.
So you've been on the force for 10 years.
10 years in November, yep.
And in particular, you've been working with the ACT team, right?
Yeah, the last 3 years I've been working embedded within the ACT team, doing mental health and addictions liaison.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Now, how old is the ACT team?
The ACT teams, I don't know how long the ACT teams have been around for. I think the VICOT team started around 9-10 years ago.
Okay.
ACT as a model has been around for a long time. I think it really caught on, and I'm a bit hazy on the history of it all. Back in the 90s when residential care places were opened up, like Riverview, and a lot of people who lived in residential mental health care were put out on the street, and it was decided that they'd be put back in the community and supporting the community. So I think ACT team started around that time, just supporting people so they can get their medications and see doctors and that sort of thing. So it's probably started around that time. I know the YYJ team, which was one of the first of its kind, where they integrated probation and police with mental health teams, and that was about 9 or 10 years ago. So that's the Vancouver Island Victoria Integrated Community Outreach Team. And so that was about 9 or 10 years ago. So they had 2 police officers at that time and a probation officer, and then they had a Ministry of Social Services welfare person as well. So that was one of the first teams. It was kind of trend setting at the time. That was one of the first teams to do that. And then from there, the ACT teams, there was 3 other ACT teams, but they didn't really have police support because with the clientele that they were working with, they didn't really need it. It was more anybody who had mental health issues, with substance issues, with criminal backgrounds, or were going through the criminal system, they would go to the YYJ team, and that's how it sort of worked.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in terms of the ACT team, obviously you guys have a very different level of training than other police officers, right?
We have a bit more.
Okay.
I have a bit more of an advantage in that I have a psych degree and I have worked mental health with kids, so I have an understanding. I worked on the need crisis line when I was back in university. I've had some training in university on counseling and empathic listening and reflective listening and stuff like that. So I have that as a bit more of an advantage. And then, of course, working as mental health liaison officers, we get to go to different conferences. We get some more little extra training and stuff like that to work with this type of clientele.
Because I imagine with that line of work in particular, it's probably quite difficult to juggle between being the protector, the caretaker, and also at times you're detaining people.
Yep.
So it's probably quite the juggling act, and I'm just wondering how that all plays out.
It's definitely a fine balance, and I know a lot of people. I know there's a lot of people in Victoria and a lot of people around that say they don't want police in mental health. They don't want police working in mental health because they feel or fear that police working in mental health are going to criminalize people who have mental health and substance issues. Our role is actually not to do that. Our role as police officers on this team, enforcement is kind of last resort. What we want to do is we want to be proactive and preemptive. So if we see as a client is starting to their mental health might be diminishing, or they're starting to move towards offending, we know this because some people, when their mental health starts to decompensate, they'll start offending, and we get all these reports. We start to know when they start having more police contact. So we'll take those reports, we'll talk to the team, we'll say this person's obviously starting to struggle. What can we do to help them? Sometimes it's just myself or my partners going to that person, sitting down with them and saying, hey, we're noticing things aren't going so great. What's going on? What can we help you with? What can we support you with? Sometimes we have to give them the hard candy and say, if you continue this way, we're going to have to arrest you. We're going to have to put you through the court system and possibly go to jail, which a lot of the times is enough for them to kind of smarten up and not do it anymore. And then that's in conjunction with the ACT teams, who may have to juggle their medication dosage, or they may have to start seeing the person maybe a couple more times a week or whatever. There's a whole bunch of different ways to do that. So yeah, enforcement is sort of our last resort. And that's not to say we don't arrest our clients. If one of our clients assaults somebody, obviously we have to deal with it. We're still police officers, so we do have to deal with it. But we prefer to deal with the person before it gets to that point. Figure out what's going on and sort of be proactive and preemptive that way. So it's a bit of a fine line. And then sometimes we do use the courts. We do arrest people. And we do use the courts as a way to sort of get parameters on people, get them on probation or on bail orders, so they have conditions that they have to abide by. And that sometimes is a good way to keep them corralled a little bit as well.
Yeah. A question I have is, and this is probably a question a lot of people have, why is it that police officers are currently doing outreach work here in Victoria?
We aren't really, we do outreach, but when we do outreach, we do it with an outreach worker. So a lot of times we go with a mental health worker or a clinician. So they're sort of the ones doing the mental health assessment side of it. We're there to support them and the client. We still do, like my partner Sue and I will still go and on our own and just go meet somebody, and if they're struggling or something's going on, we'll go out and do outreach ourselves and do what needs to be done. How it came about? Just through just through necessity. I think we started to see that, it's no shocker to people that it seems like mental health in Victoria and, pretty much everywhere, but in Victoria, mental health seems to be on the increase. And I feel that the police are kind of the last rung on that ladder as people kind of bounce through the system and no one can really deal with people. If you have a guy on the street who's in psychosis, who do people call? They call the police to deal with it, right? So I think it's just becoming out of necessity. And I think with mental health on the rise and on the increase, and with people realizing that mental health and drug addiction is a health issue, it's not a criminal issue, we're already involved in it. So why not have us in a position where we're proactive and preemptive rather than chasing them and being just strictly enforcement-based and reactive?
Right.
So that's sort of how it's come about, or that's how it's been evolving over the last few years.
And I can imagine too that when it comes to an overdose crisis, you guys are on the front line, and I'm sure you have training with naloxone.
Yep.
And I don't know if you want to talk about that a bit, but
I'm usually with somebody who has naloxone. I haven't actually used a dose of naloxone on anybody. Now the prevalence of naloxone, everybody has naloxone kits. So the naloxone I carry with me in my bag, I have 2 nasal naloxones with me at all times. They're mostly for me and they're for my partner. So if we get in contact with some sort of a fentanyl and my partner goes down, it's there for them. That's not to say we can't use it if we come across one of our clients or we come across somebody in the 900 block of Pandora. Obviously, we're first responders, right? We swear on oath to protect life and property. So we're going to use it on that person to try to bring them back. So we do carry it with us, but having said that, though, we're not medically trained. Like I have a lot of us have our very basic first aid. I have a little bit higher first aid, but we're not medically trained. We're not there to. So if I find somebody overdosing on the street, I'm going to get the normal first aid thing. Get an ambulance rolling. I need somebody. If there's a nurse at the Vicot office or the ACT office, I'm going to get them because they're better trained than I am.
Right.
But I will, administer the naloxone if I have to.
Yeah. Now, in terms of the mental health crisis, I recently read that you guys are getting a mental health call every 12 minutes or so. And I don't know if that's necessarily fact. That's just what I read recently. I'm not sure if you want to.
I don't know. If I can't speak to that time specifically, but I do know pretty consistently for the last while since we've been keeping the stats, which has been probably a year, maybe more, 2 years, I would say. I could be wrong on that too, but that pretty much 25% of our calls have a mental health component to it. So if you look at it, it's 100 calls a day, you're looking at 25 calls a day where it has a mental health component. So those are calls where that can be anything from a suicidal person or someone's been recalled to hospital on a mental health warrant, or a lot of the times what we get are calls of people acting oddly, or people screaming in the street, or people scaring somebody, or somebody's taking off their clothes on the street corner, or a lot of those calls where somebody is in some sort of mental health crisis. We don't really know what it is. We don't know if they're actively in a mental health crisis or if they're in a meth psychosis. To us, it's the same thing as police officers, and we deal with it the same way. But yeah, it's an unfortunate percentage, and I think that's maybe even underreported to me.
One of my questions is, there's a lot of focus right now on the fentanyl crisis, but I've also heard that there's a terrible methamphetamine crisis.
It's a horrible methamphetamine crisis right now. And don't get me wrong, like the fentanyl crisis is a horrible thing. People are dying from it, but it's not with the onset of people carrying naloxone, and it's horrible. People are dying from this, but I think personally, and this is my personal opinion, and you can agree with me or disagree with me, and some people do and some people don't. If you want to talk pure dollars and cents and resources being eaten up, it's the methamphetamine. I've been saying this for years because I used to walk the beat before, and I used to deal with more enforcement, but dealing with the same clientele, street entrenched and drug addicted and mental health. And I've been seeing just this wave of methamphetamine coming in, and it is wreaking havoc on the city. Like I don't know how else to describe it. It's just wreaking havoc. It's chaos out there because of it. And I think it's hitting a lot of different communities, but it's huge because it's a stimulant, and it's causing people to display these type of behaviors that are seen as psychotic, right? And we don't know necessarily the difference. Or if somebody does have maybe some mental health disorder, and they do okay when they don't use, but as soon as they start using and they're up for a couple of days, it just exacerbates that mental health, that underlying mental health issue they may have. And it's insane out there, the amount of methamphetamine and what's doing to people out there right now. Yeah. And I'd say that's a big crux of what we deal with on a day-to-day basis is just the methamphetamine. I think a lot of the crime that we see, I think it's the basis for a lot of the crime that we see. A lot of theft from autos, theft of autos, the bike thefts in Victoria have gone up. I don't know how many percentage it's gone up, huge amounts. And it's methamphetamine use. They steal bikes. If it's not nailed down, it's pretty much stolen. So break and enters and all these sort of things. So it's a huge problem right now, and I don't know what the answer is.
What would you say the age group is that you deal with most?
A lot of them are 18 to 35, but there's some guys out there that are in their 40s and 50s on the street that are using methamphetamine. It used to be crack. Crack used to be the stimulant of choice on the street 5 years ago when I first started walking. Methamphetamine is just sort of sneaking in, but I don't even see crack anymore. I see people smoking meth. A lot of people that I arrest or deal with, it's methamphetamine, because you buy a point of methamphetamine, which on the street right now, I was talking to somebody the other day who's a methamphetamine user. If you know your dealer and have a good relationship, you're paying $4 to $6 a point, which is about a tenth of a gram. When you don't know your dealer, you're paying $6 to $8. So a hit of crack is like a point of crack, or a rock of crack is about $10 or $20. But you have to smoke that every 20 minutes to keep the high going. Meth, you smoke it once, you smoke your point or smoke half your point, and you're high for 6 to 12 hours.
Yeah.
So it's just simple economics, right?
Yeah. So for folks out there that aren't educated when it comes to these illicit substances, I'm wondering if you can sort of focus on the differences between fentanyl and meth.
Yeah. So methamphetamine is a stimulant, so it's a central nervous system stimulant. So what it does is it speeds you up. Right, it's like having a cup of coffee that like 1,000 times more powerful. It disinhibits you. It gives you a ton of energy. And then what it does is it just you don't sleep. You stay awake. And of course, as you smoke more of it, you stay awake longer, and then things start happening due to people when they don't sleep or when they're using copious amounts of stimulants. Fentanyl and heroin is a depressant, central nervous system depressant. So what it does is it slows you down, slows down your breathing, slows down everything. So basically, they're pain medications, right? Fentanyl, it's like they use it in the hospital all the time. I had it when I had my appendix out a couple years ago. So what it does is it takes the pain away. It slows down your central nervous system, and that's when you see the people on the street who are kind of on the nod or sitting against the wall and they're half asleep or asleep. The methamphetamine ramps you up, gets you going.
So generally when people are taking methamphetamine, they're entering complete states of psychosis, correct?
They can do. I think long-term methamphetamine use for sure, which is part of the problem when I spoke earlier about talking dollars and cents. People on the street who are using methamphetamine for long periods of time, I think it has, from what I've been speaking to some of the psychiatrists that I work with on the ACT teams, what happens is that the methamphetamine changes the part of your brain that allows you to regulate your emotions. So what happens is that part of your brain just goes away. So then even if you stop using methamphetamine later, that part doesn't come back and you become emotionally dysregulated sort of for the rest of your life. So if something happens to you, our brain can sort of keep us calm and you can deal with it. Not so much. So when you're using meth, that's the part of the brain that it affects. And that's why we see a lot of people on the street screaming and yelling or assaulting people randomly or because of the use of that methamphetamine.
So it's permanent damage in some of these cases?
Yes.
Permanent damage to the brain?
Yeah, I believe so. From the psychiatrists I've been speaking to, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, which, of course, we got a lot of people on the street, long-term methamphetamine use, 5, 10, 15 years from now, that's where we're still going to be continuing to pay for it, right?
Yeah. So what are some of the most difficult calls that you have to deal with? If you don't mind, like taking me through a day in your life.
As an ACT officer or as a police officer?
I mean,
Either or?
either or.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, definitely as an ACT officer, some of the hardest parts of our job that we have to deal with is for me is when somebody's at a certain point in that they're decompensating or their mental health is not doing so well. We have to take them to the hospital, and of course, people don't like to be forced to go to the hospital. They don't like to be forced to take their medication, and unfortunately, part of our role is doing that. If somebody needs to take antipsychotic medication or they're not doing well and they need to go to the hospital because they're a danger to themselves or others, usually we're relied upon to come to that person and say, we've got a warrant, we need to take you to the hospital, or you need to take your medication, we got to take you to the hospital. So for me, that's really hard, sort of taking that person's rights away from them and taking them to the hospital. And sometimes it's under duress, they don't want to go, and sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes we have to use force, which I don't like to do, because a lot of these people that I work with, who I do this with, I build good relationships with. When they're not in psychosis and when they're not decompensating, we can sit and talk over coffee, or we can sit in the lobby and we can have good conversations, and which actually helps when it comes to those times when we have to take them to the hospital. But it's hard because I build relationships with these people and I get to know them, they get to know me, and then all of a sudden I'm now that person who's coming in and taking those rights away from them and forcing them to go to the hospital. So that, to me, as an ACT officer, is probably one of the more difficult parts of the job.
Yeah.
As a police officer, in general, domestic disputes are some of the hardest things we have to go to. Anything with children, obviously, for me, is a tough one too. So, yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but violent crime here in Victoria has increased while the rest of the province has decreased. I'm just wondering why that might be.
I'm not sure why it has, and I'm not too well versed on the statistics on that. But from what I understand, I think a lot of that is going back to the methamphetamine use. I think with that emotional dysregulation and the amount of methamphetamine use, I think that's part and parcel of the reason why that violent crime is going up.
In terms of this methamphetamine problem, do you have
You know what? People with bigger brains and bigger paychecks than me have thought about this problem and haven't come up with a solution. I don't know. You look at Portugal, you look at Italy, right? They basically have decriminalized drugs and they're having success over there. Maybe that's a solution. I don't think necessarily it is, or maybe there's parts of that we can use, because if you think about it, Portugal and Italy, they're a different society. They've been around a lot longer. They're just different from us, right? For the way their values and our values and things are just different. There may be parts of it that might work, the decriminalizing. I'm not sure. I think, unfortunately, we're too influenced by our neighbors to the south to sort of get to the point where they are in Italy and Portugal. And it's been a great success over there. And one of the things that's actually happening in Victoria, and I don't know if a lot of people know about it, is the Therapeutic Recovery Center out in View Royal is based upon the same sort of model. They've taken some parts from those. They have similar things in Portugal and Italy. They've taken some of those ideas and brought it here, and that's actually being quite a success out there. So I'm hopeful that maybe decriminalizing it might help, but I really don't know.
So how often are you guys arresting folks for minor possession these days?
To be honest with you, we very rarely, like myself and my partners, because we're in the 900 block Pandora all the time, which is pretty much the epicenter of the open air drug trade in Victoria. If I see somebody in possession, the stance I take now and the approach I take with these people is I generally, if I have to arrest them, I'll arrest them, but I arrest them because I have the judicial authority to do so, but I'm not necessarily going to charge them. I'm not going to take them to jail. What I generally do is I put them in handcuffs, I'll search them, and I'll have a conversation with them about respecting your community, right? Because not only, just because they're not in a block of Pandora and everyone's doing drugs, there doesn't mean that there's other people who don't still use the space and still don't have the right to use the space. So I have a conversation with them about respecting other people who have to come in the area, other people have to work in the area, other people have to live in the area, and respecting themselves, right? So I have that conversation with them, and then after we've had the conversation, I'll handcuff them and then let them go, right? So very rarely do we arrest people for simple possession anymore, because possession and because substance use and substance addiction is a health issue. It's not a criminal issue.
Right.
So we still have that authority to arrest somebody for it, but and we will use it if we have to. And if I arrest somebody for possession, I find a whole bunch of drugs on them, I think they're dealing drugs, I'll charge them for the trafficking. I won't charge them for the possession. But the possession is what allows me to do the search to find the drugs.
Do you find a lot of people trafficking and selling and dealing?
Everybody deals in the 900 block. And a lot of people, they middle or they deal in order to support their own habits. A lot of the higher up, mid-level guys and higher guys, they aren't in the area. They kind of have people they drop off to, and then they go into the area and they drop it off to certain people, and that's sort of how it works.
Yeah.
But
would that open up a line of communication with maybe a social worker saying this person is having an issue, an addiction, or is that not part of your...
No, not really, unless they're one of the ACT people or they're attached to a team.
Okay.
Because there's other mental health teams in town too that we support. There's the 713 outreach team. There's the SAMI team. And you mean like simple possession, or if they're actually trafficking drugs?
Simple possession in particular. I'm just wondering if it might make sense to get them in touch with some sort of support, because...
Yeah, and we do try to do that. The unfortunate thing is there's not a lot of supports out there to get them in touch with.
Really?
Yeah, there's long wait lists for detox. There's long wait lists for stabilization. There's long wait lists for alcohol outreach. There's long wait lists for any of these systems that are health related for people to get into, and it's very difficult to get into them. I'll do what I can to try to help the person, but ultimately it comes down to that person having to help themselves, right? I can do everything I can in the world to get that person off drugs, but if they don't want to do it, they're not going to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, we do. If I find somebody who's using and I know they're attached to a team, or I'll try to help them out in some way. But again, it's that whole adage of, you got to hit rock bottom, and you got to, no one's going to do it except for you, right? So, it's just unfortunate. Like we don't, on Vancouver Island, we don't even have a detox center. Like if we have someone here who needs to go to detox, we send them to the Burnaby Center, or actually, no, that's not true. There's one up in Comox Valley. But again, wait lists are huge, and it's impossible. It's hard to get into, and it's difficult. And the people who go have to go on their own accord. We can't force them to go.
So how often are you seeing repeat offenders in this realm?
All the time.
So
and I hate to say it, I hate the revolving door, but I see it all the time. But on the silver lining side of it, we do have people who were repeat offenders, who through the work of myself and Sue and Ross and other people who've worked as ACT officers, who were what we used to have a thing called the top 5 call generators. We used to have a list of 5 people every month who are the top 5 call generators. So they would have, some of them were having 5-6 police contacts a day. And so some of those people who were that maybe a year and a half ago, went through our work and the work of the ACT teams, a lot of those people haven't had a police contact in 6 months, a year. They're housed. They may still be doing drugs, but they're not having the police contacts. They're not eating up the police resources like they had been doing. I can think of at least half a dozen people off the top of my head. And a lot of police officers talk to me about, like they ask me, like, well, what is it you do? Why do you do this? And, is it really doing anything? And I'd throw out a few names. I'm like, well, have you heard about this person recently? They're like, no, I haven't. Oh, it's because they're on an ACT team. They're taking their antipsychotic medication. They're housed, and they're not having any police contacts. So there are repeat offenders, and then there's people who actually have gotten help and have stabilized and are doing actually really well.
From your perspective, how could the ACT team improve? What are some of the gaps that you've identified?
I don't think ACT teams can improve.
Okay.
I don't think the ACT teams specifically can improve. I think the system needs to improve. I think that a lot of And again, this is like this big, massive spider web. So because of this increase of methamphetamine and what it's doing to people, and the increase in violent crime, people are just scrambling as to what can we do with these people, where can we put them? And unfortunately, the ACT teams are kind of the only place where, because we have police officers on the team, people are like, well, we'll put them on an ACT team. But the ACT teams will have a certain criteria, and they don't necessarily want to take really violent people, even though police are attached to it. Because what happens if you load all these teams with all these high maintenance, violent people, you burn your people out. So they have to have a real balance. And I'm not, like, the ACT teams are amazing. Like, don't get me wrong, like, those people work hard, and they've got the biggest hearts going. Like, I've never met people who have such big hearts and are compassionate about their work. It's a system that's sort of broken, I think, because there's just not enough resources out there for people. There's so many people addicted to methamphetamine who have mental health issues, and there's just not enough stuff out there. There's not enough housing. There's not enough detox. There's no detox centers. There's too long a wait list to get on any teams. It's just the system is overwhelmed.
Right.
Yeah.
Don Evans actually recently stated that it's going to get worse before it gets better.
I fully agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with that said, it's a systematic problem. And what do you think needs to take place so that we can fix the system?
I think we need more. I don't want to say more money needs to be put into mental health, but what I see is, it's kind of cliche, but say you or I get cancer and we go to the hospital, we get treatment, and we get treatment until we're cured, or we're in remission, or we die, right? Somebody with a mental health or addiction problem, they get some help, but the treatment is sort of minimal. They sort of, okay, we're going to get you on this medication, we're going to support you with this, but there's just not enough on the long-term side of things to get them into treatment centers, and not enough treatment centers and not enough places for these people to go. So I think that's a huge, if anything's got to change, that's what's got to change. It's got to be more places for people to go to get off the drugs and to deal with their trauma, which is probably the foundation of why they are where they are.
Right.
So that's what's needed. There's just not enough of that. And we're just going to continue to circle around until it happens, I think.
I've heard this statement made, which I think rings very true, that you guys are part of the solution, but emphasizing part. You are not the solution.
Yeah, it feels like that sometimes. And again, going back to what I said earlier, it's because we're the last rung on the ladder. These people out there who are in crisis or something's happening to them, they kind of fall down the ladder until they land into our laps. And then we're the people who are sort of relied upon to do something about it. There's nothing really after us. Like, who's going to help? Like, if a guy's having, threatening people with a knife downtown and he's in a mental health crisis, who are people going to call? They're going to call the police to come deal with it. They're not going to call a social worker to come out necessarily in the middle of the night to come and talk with the guy who's holding a knife and threatening to hurt people. They call the police.
Right.
So yeah, we are part of this. We're a big part of the solution, but we need to start breaking down the silos, and we've been doing that. Like, we've been working really hard. Sue and Ross and a lot of Victoria Police have been working really, really hard to engage with all the different stakeholders, our place, and with the BC Housing and all the different ones. I can't name them all, but we work really, PHS and Kool-Aid, and we work really, really hard to break down all those silos, to sit and try to think of solutions on what are we going to do here. And one of the things that we do every week is that we have a Priority 1 population meeting, which brings together all the heads of all the different stakeholders. So there's myself, Sean Hand, who's a community resource officer, who is doing amazing things, getting people housed, and he's incredible. And then we meet with Kelly Reed, who's very high up in Island Health. We meet with all the jail, Wilkinson people call in. And so we all talk. We have a list of people who are some of the hardest people that we're dealing with on the street. Like, what are we going to do with these people? And we sit for an hour every week and we talk about them and we come up with solutions and we figure out what we're going to do. And that's police are a very, very small part of that. And there's all these Kool-Aid and Pacifica, and all these people get together and have these very long conversations about what we're going to do. And we've had some great success from that meeting.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned Sean, and Sean's a great guy.
He is a great guy, yeah.
So he's actually affiliated with the HEART program.
He is, yeah.
And I don't know if you want to talk about that a bit.
I don't know too much about it. Sean might have to talk more about that, but I do know they do have housing outreach, and I've gone out with him a few times. So this is when, you know, you have the people living in the parks and the people living in the doorways. And I know that he goes out with social workers and different stakeholders, and they meet. That he just goes out and makes contact with people living rough on the street, and they actually physically there on the street get them signed up for housing, get them going, get them their VAT that they need, which is a assessment tool they need to figure out where they're going to get housed, and they don't wait for them to come to us. We're actually going out. Police and social workers and outreach workers and mental health workers are actually going out to these people to actively get that rolling, which I think is huge. Like, that's massive, because people on the street, I think, are living a life that, and I don't want to speak for all of them, but I think they feel, you know, that they're kind of hopeless. There's not much out there for them, and at least the ones I've spoken to. And to have people come to you in a doorway and say, hey, we're willing to work towards getting you housing. This is all we need to do. I think it's a huge step, and he's a great guy. It's been a great, really good program. I'm really proud of him for being a part of it.
Now that program, that's on a voluntary basis, right? Currently, or
with Sean,
the HEART program.
The HEART program, yeah.
So there's no funding for it whatsoever.
I think people just kind of are just doing it. Like, Sean does it off the side of his desk. I can't speak for the social workers and outreach workers, but it's part of Sean's. It's sort of become part of Sean's mandate. It wasn't to start with. I think he's just sort of, it's evolved, and it's off the side of his desk, and he's put a lot of heart and a lot of work into it.
Wow. And it's modeled after Washington, I believe.
Or Washington or Portland. I can't remember which exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry. I don't know too much about it.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
No, it's a brilliant program.
It is a brilliant program, yeah.
Nobody knows about it.
No, I know. Surprisingly. So, yeah, I think Sean would be a great guy to have come in and talk about that, because he'll talk about it he's very passionate about it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
What do you think is one of the biggest misconceptions the public currently has about the Vic PD?
Ooh.
We're going there.
Yeah, we are going there. Jeez. Where do I start?
It's your space.
Yeah, my God. I've always wanted to answer this question, and now I'm getting asked it. I think a lot, and you know what? I think a lot of people, and I get this a lot of times, I get a lot of people coming up to me and thanking me for what I do when I'm in uniform, because I work plain clothes and I work with the ACT team, so people don't necessarily know I'm a police officer. But when I'm in uniform, I think a majority of the people in Victoria support the police and what we do and how we do it. I think a lot of the people who criticize us and who don't believe in what we do, I think they just don't believe in the institution of policing. I don't know if they just think policing just shouldn't exist. I don't know how that would, I can't imagine what that would look like. But I think a lot of people who criticize us have this sort of outdated view of what policing is. I think they look at police as the police of 30, 40 years ago, right? And, you know, policing has had its issues. You know, when you're put in a state, in a place of authority, you have to do certain things, and I think, you know, we've made mistakes along the way, but there's been plenty of doctors and lawyers and people who've made mistakes along the way, and we learn from them, right? And it's funny, last night I was working and I was talking to somebody, and they asked me kind of a similar question to this, and I said, we're pretty much the only profession where we're hated for doing our job and we're hated for not doing our job. So it puts us in a hard spot.
You guys are in a paradox.
Yeah, we're very much in a paradox. So I think generally, for the most part, we're supported, and I think the people who criticize what we do, I think they just have this belief about policing. They just don't believe police should exist, which is fine. That's their political view. It doesn't really matter to me. But I think a lot of people have this sort of outdated view of what police are. I've actually had people come up to me and say, social workers and outreach workers say to us, you know, you guys are actually some of the most open-minded people out here, right? You guys are actually thinking outside the box, and you're doing everything you guys can to try to change things and fix things. And policing is ever evolving, just like everything, right? So we learn from mistakes, and yes, we've made mistakes and we learn from it. But, you know, we had to have these people come to us and say, you guys are some of the most open-minded and people in our community. It's a nice thing and I just wish more people knew that we're actually not, you know, high school bullies who've left high school and put on a uniform to continue to bully people. We're just not that, right? I didn't get into this job to go out and bully people. Like, I didn't get up in the morning and think to myself, okay, I'm going to go out and punch somebody out, or I'm going to go roughly handcuff somebody. I don't think that, right? It's just not. And I think a lot of officers don't think like that. I'm not going to say all, because there are some who maybe think that, but majority of officers, they actually want to get up in the morning and do good.
Yeah, for sure. What has been one of the most important lessons you've learned on the force?
Oh my God. So one of the important lessons I've learned, and this is sort of part of my personality, is I don't want to like sound like I'm tooting my own horn, but I have a certain respect from a lot of the people, the street entrenched people, and the people I see every day, and they actually come up to me sometimes and go, you know what, you're really respectful to us. Why is that? Like, why do you? And I said, well, and this is something I've sort of figured out over time. I say to them, the way I police is I treat everybody on the street, or I treat everybody, not just on the street, but anybody I come in contact with, I treat them like I would want my own children treated if they're in the same situation.
Wow.
And they're just like, oh. So every time I go out, whenever I go out, I treat everybody the same. I treat everybody like I would want my children treated if they were approached by a police officer. And I also, everything's a blank slate. So if I have an issue with somebody one day and says it doesn't go well, the next time I deal with them, it's a blank slate. Like, that's complete. That's in the past. We're starting new. See how it goes from here.
So
that's how I do it.
So forgiveness too is a big part.
Absolutely. Yeah. Forgiveness and just moving on, right? And some people hold grudges, and some people, and that's fine. That's their thing, right? But I tell people, like, you know, that was then. This is now. Let's deal with what we're dealing with now.
Yeah. What have been some of the shifts that you've seen in the department over your 10 years?
Well, definitely the mental health stuff has been huge. I think we've been really, really working hard to not only keep up with it, but try to stay ahead of it. You know, just seeing how many calls we do with mental health and how much we have to deal with that. I think trying to keep up and train ourselves and keep an open mind about it and what can we do to help it. I think that's been a huge, in the last few years especially, we've really, really evolved very quickly to deal with that.
Yeah. So for an aspiring police officer, what sort of advice would you give? Like, if there was a young person who was interested in that line of work,
Yep.
what would you tell them?
First off, I would tell them, make sure that this is the line of work you really want to do, because it's not for everybody. Unfortunately, we see things and we go to things and that not everybody can deal with, and you know, it's tough. So first thing I say is make sure you want to do that. So I would say go talk to other police officers. If you can do a ride along or hang out, get as much information about policing as you can, because I think a lot of people have this view of policing that they get from television, that it's you know, all sexy, driving around, shooting guns. My advice to them is take a typing course, because you're gonna be doing a lot of paperwork.
Right.
But yeah, get a lot of information. Figure out that it is what you want to do, because it's a hard job to do, and it's definitely takes a certain person to do it. Secondly, I would say be good, don't cause issues, don't get arrested, and then I would say start, you know, and give back to your community. Start early. Start volunteering, start doing whatever you need to do to give back to your community, because we're looked upon by the community as a higher standard. So if you can start embedding that into yourself early on, I think it will ring true as you become an officer, that this is just part of who you are, that you give back to the community, because that's what we strive to do every day.
Yeah. And Vic PD, I mean, you guys are doing so much with the community, right?
Yeah.
What are you doing in particular? Not to put you on the spot.
No, it's all good. So, so on a personal level, myself and my family, we've been volunteering with Santa's Anonymous for, gosh, six years now, since my kids were little, and they love it. So we do that. I did the Tour de Rock 3 years ago. Great experience. Family was involved with that, helping with the fundraising. As a Vic PD officer, I actually run the Victoria Police Athletic Association basketball tournament every year, so in January. So I've been running that for about 8 years. So I organize that with Lindsay Brooke at St. Mike's University, and we get senior basketball teams coming in, so that's really good. And we get all types of uniformed police officers coming in to interact with the kids. So I do that. I've been doing that for a long time. What do? We serve food at McDonald's. We serve food at Tim Hortons. We serve breakfast and lunch at our place. We do lots of different things, community outreach type things. We're doing, I can't remember what it's called, but we're doing a thing at Christmas this year as well. So we do a lot of things and that's just stuff I can think off the top of my head. There's lots and lots of officers who volunteer their time or give back to the community and do various things, coaching, and we're very involved. And I know Ross Smith, my partner, he does a thing where he goes, takes kids in a Esquimalt every so often. He rents ice, takes kids from Esquimalt, and they all go out and play hockey for an hour. He goes out there and skates around with them. So
nice.
Yeah, so lots of little programs like that.
It sounds like your work is every aspect of your life. So it's not like you can turn it off. It's not like anybody's going to a 9 to 5, turning it off. It sounds like you are a police officer.
It becomes part of your identity. Yeah, like a lot of people can do their job and switch it off and just go home. All that stuff starts to become ingrained in you, right? Like, if I'm off duty and I see an incident happen, I jump into it and I just start dealing with it, however I need to deal with it, or, going out and I used to coach lacrosse. My kids play lacrosse or doing whatever I can. Like, it's the reason I got into this job is because I wanted to serve my community. And so you just sort of becomes part of you and you just do it.
Yeah. That actually, I was going to ask, what sort of coping mechanisms have you come up with? Because I can't imagine how difficult that job must be, and how difficult it must be to separate your personal life from it. Because I'm sure at some point you have to have that separation just for your mental health. So what sort of coping mechanisms or characteristics have you sort of adapted?
Me personally, I do transcendental meditation. So
Nice.
I do that twice a day. And it helps immensely. And it's actually really good because it's a program that our department started through our employee wellness program. We got a grant to try this out. I know Central Saanich Police did it, and they saw great success with it. So we tried it. So I was luckily one of the people who's chosen to try it out, and I absolutely love it. It's nice for a person I'm a very busy person. I'd like to keep busy. I don't like to sit. It's nice to have that 20 minutes or 40 minutes a day where it forces me to sit, relax my body, and just the results of that are huge. So I'm finding that I sleep better. I'm able to manage stress better. My thinking is better. I'm able to just do my job that much better. Excuse me. And then of course part of our job, huge part of our job is just staying in shape, right? So going to the gym every day, whether it's going for a run, lifting weights, doing some sort of martial arts, some sort of activity, riding a bike or whatever, is huge for stress release. So I go to the gym at least 5 days a week, try to get to do that. And again, that's also part of it is just staying in shape, because this job is a hard job. You work a 12-hour shift. You could go from sitting in your car for 3 hours, just kind of taking call after call to call, and all of a sudden you're in a foot chase. And then that foot chase turns into a wrestling match on the ground, and then you have to take the person into custody. And then once that's all over and done with, you could have another one the next one, right? Or you could have another one the next one. So keeping that level of fitness is really important. And I think we owe that to the community to be in shape so we can do our jobs, right? So that's a big part of it. I work out all the time. The transcendental meditation has been huge. I eat well. When I have my off time, I try to have my off time. My kids and my family are huge for me, right? Like, it's my life. That's the reason I do all this. So hanging out with my kids, playing basketball with my daughter, taking my son to the movies, going out for dinner with my wife, movie nights at home, those sort of things, right? Just to try to keep that work-life balance. And it's hard, work does, you may have a call or you may have a file that eats away at you on your days off, and it can sometimes affect the family. You could be a bit grumpier or a little bit disconnected from what's happening because you're kind of in your mind with things. Like we do see things that do affect us, but we do have ways of dealing with it. But we're human, and we're going to be affected by it. So
yeah, what's been one of your most difficult calls?
Actually, probably one of my more difficult calls, back in 2014, the View Towers caught on fire. And so a bunch of us ran into the building I was up on the 9th floor, and we started evacuating the building out because it was like a massive smoke filling the sky and flames shooting out of this apartment. So a bunch of us ended up running into the building, getting upstairs, evacuating people out. We had guys carrying like little old ladies on their shoulders down flights of stairs to get them out of the apartment building. Got everybody evacuated. Everybody got out safe. Myself and my partner actually were on the floor that was on fire, just smoke everywhere. So we were dealing with that. It was probably one of the hard ones, probably one that still affects me, because I was just very lucky that day that I got out of there and didn't get hurt or worse. You know, not to be grim, but, you know, I've been to some sudden deaths that have been there for weeks in hot rooms, and they're not pleasant. Probably the hardest part of the job for me, well, anything to do with kids, but probably the hardest part of the job is going to someone's house, knocking on the door and sitting them down and telling them that their child's dead or passed away, or having to do that next of kin notification. That's probably, and any police officer would probably say that's probably the worst part of the job, is having to go there and tell a mother that your son has died.
Yeah. So on the flip coin of that, what does a really successful day look like for you?
A solid day is I was busy. I worked hard, but not too hard. I feel like I accomplished something, whether I got somebody somewhere to an appointment or I helped somebody who was struggling. I made it home safe. That's a huge one for any police officer, right? Just getting through your 12-hour day uninjured and safe, so you can get home to your family. That's a huge one, right? So that's a positive. You can get home to your family safe. That's a good one, right? Yeah, and then just for me, I'm a bit of a joker. I like joking around. So if I can make people laugh and have a good time, but also do the job and do it to the best of my ability, that's a good day.
Yeah.
And get home safe to the family.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
What's the Vic PD's busiest day of the year?
You can pick one. It's probably Canada Day, New Year's, or Halloween.
Okay.
Yeah, those are probably the 3 busiest.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, on my end, I think we covered quite a bit of ground.
Sounded great to me.
Cool.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything that you want to touch on or that you wanted to say. Or...
No, I think that was great. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate this conversation. It's been great.
Yeah, I really appreciate having you on. That was a really great insight into what the life of a police officer, a really wicked one, in my opinion.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah. We'll give you the props for sure when we see you on the street.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Awesome. Cool. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Veracity podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation and want to support us, be sure to like, comment, or share. You can also follow us at Veracity Podcast on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook for updates and exclusive content. If you're interested in being a featured guest on the show, you can visit our website at veracitypodcast.com and head on down to the Contact Us section. Thanks again for listening. It means so much to us, and stay tuned for more conversations just like this.